My wife orchestrated a meeting with her ex-lover at a bar to test my ability to stay calm and unjealous. She spent an hour belittling me while he chuckled, then declared, "Look, I've been married for 3 years, and in that time I've learned a few things about relationships. First, never eat the last slice of pizza without asking. Second, the correct answer to 'does this make me look fat?' is always, 'You look amazing, babe.' And third, when your wife hits you with a sentence that starts with, 'I want you to meet my ex,' you're about to enter a minefield disguised as a marriage counseling session." It was a Tuesday evening, which should have been my first clue that something was off. Nothing good ever happens on a Tuesday. Mondays you expect to be terrible. Wednesdays you're halfway through the week, so there's hope. But Tuesdays? Tuesdays are when the universe decides to mess with you just for kicks. I was sitting on our couch, minding my own business, watching a basketball game and eating leftover Chinese food straight from the container like a civilized human being, when Sophia walked in with that look on her face. You know the look, the one that says, "I've been thinking," which is wife code for "buckle up, buttercup, your comfortable evening is about to get complicated." She sat down next to me, muted the TV, which, by the way, is a criminal offense in the middle of a Tide game, and turned to face me with her hands folded in her lap like she was about to deliver a TED Talk on how to ruin someone's night. "Honey," she said, using that sweet voice that immediately activated every defense mechanism in my body. "I want you to meet my ex, Mason. It's just to prove you're not a jealous man." Now, let me tell you something about that sentence. When your wife casually drops the name of her ex-boyfriend in a conversation like she's talking about trying a new coffee shop, every single cell in your body, every neuron in your brain, every instinct you've developed since childhood starts screaming at maximum volume. It's like that scene in every horror movie where the character hears a weird noise in the basement and decides to investigate instead of, leaving the house and calling the cops like a reasonable person. Your internal alarm system is blaring, "Abort mission, abort mission." Your fight or flight response is doing jumping jacks, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a tiny voice that sounds suspiciously like your mother is saying, "I told you so." But here's the thing about being a man in a relationship. Sometimes your mouth doesn't get the memo from your brain. While my entire nervous system was staging a protest, my mouth, that traitorous idiot, smiled and said, "Sure, babe. Sounds great." I swear, if my brain could have filed for divorce from my mouth right then and there, it would have hired the best lawyer in town. Sophia's face lit up like I'd just agreed to buy her a puppy and a yacht. "Really? Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you. This is such a big step in our relationship. It shows real emotional maturity." Emotional maturity. Right. She was calling it a test of emotional maturity. I was calling it a brand new episode of How Dumb Do You Think I Am? Which, coincidentally, was about to become my least favorite reality show, and I was the unwilling star. She went on to explain her brilliant theory about how secure couples should be able to interact with their exes without any jealousy or drama, like we were all supposed to be one big happy family in a sitcom where everyone's well-adjusted and nobody's secretly plotting revenge. She used words like trust, transparency, and growth, which are all great concepts in theory, but tend to fall apart faster than a house of cards in a hurricane when you're talking about introducing your current husband to the guy you used to make out with. Here's what she didn't know, though. Here's the beautiful, ironic twist that made me smile genuinely for the first time since she started this conversation. I already knew exactly what she was up to. See, I have this friend Marcus, great guy, works in the city, has impeccable timing and a smartphone with an excellent camera. About a week ago, Marcus sent me a text message that simply said, "Dude, you need to see this," followed by a photo that would make any husband's blood pressure spike high enough to register on the Richter scale. The photo showed Sophia and some guy, who I could only assume was the legendary Mason, sitting at a cafe table, their hands intertwined like they were starring in a romance novel called How to Betray Your Spouse in 5 Easy Steps. They weren't just accidentally touching. This wasn't a whoops, our hands brushed while reaching for the salt shaker situation. No, this was full on, fingers laced together, gazing into each other's eyes. We're definitely doing something we wouldn't be doing hand-holding. Marcus had caught them red-handed, or should I say, hand-in-hand, which is really just red-handed with extra steps. So while Sophia sat there explaining her innocent little test, spinning this narrative about proving my emotional security and showing how evolved our marriage was. I was sitting there with full knowledge that this whole thing was about as innocent as a fox volunteering to guard a henhouse. She wanted to parade her ex-boyfriend in front of me, probably to see if she could juggle two men without dropping either ball, or maybe to make me jealous enough to fight for her, like we were in some rom-com where the grand gesture at the end makes everyone forget about the lying and cheating that happened in the middle. But here's the thing about finding out your wife is playing games. It gives you time to prepare your own strategy. That night, as she sat there planning her little innocent test, talking about which bar would be best for us all to meet up at, and what she should wear to look casual but not too casual, I was planning something infinitely better. I was planning a test of my own, and unlike hers, mine would have actual consequences that couldn't be smoothed over with crocodile tears and promises to work on our communication. I nodded along, made appropriate sounds, and even suggested that Italian place downtown because their breadsticks were excellent, and I figured if I was going to watch my marriage implode, I might as well have good appetizers. Sophia was thrilled with my cooperation, probably thinking she'd successfully manipulated her naive husband into walking straight into her trap. Little did she know, I wasn't walking into anything. I was building my own trap, one that would snap shut with the precision of a 5-star Yelp review on a restaurant that gave you food poisoning. As she kissed my cheek and went to call Mason to set up the details, I sat back on the couch, unmuted the game, and smiled. Not the fake smile I'd been wearing for the last 10 minutes, but a real one. Because sometimes in life, you don't get mad, you don't get even, you get strategic. And brother, I was about to become a 5-star general in the war of marital warfare. So here's the thing about playing dumb. It requires actual intelligence. Any idiot can throw a tantrum, smash some plates, and start yelling like they're auditioning for a daytime talk show. But to convincingly play the role of the slightly insecure, completely clueless husband who's walking straight into his wife's trap, that takes skill, finesse, and acting chops that deserve an Oscar, or at least a Golden Globe nomination. For the next week, I transformed myself into exactly the kind of husband Sophia apparently wanted. The perfect blend of trusting and just insecure enough to make her feel like she was pulling off the con of the century. I became a method actor, and my role was guy who definitely doesn't know his wife is cheating. It was like playing poker, except instead of cards, I was holding evidence of infidelity, and instead of chips, I was betting my entire marriage. No pressure or anything. The morning after her big announcement, I started my performance over breakfast. Sophia was making her usual green smoothie, the kind that looks like something the Hulk would drink if he was trying to lose weight, when I casually dropped my first line. So, babe, I said, keeping my voice light and conversational while I buttered my toast. Do you still talk to your ex often? Or is that like a monthly reminder subscription? You know, like Netflix, but for people you used to sleep with. She nearly choked on her kale and whatever else was in that monstrosity. What? No. I mean, we text sometimes, but it's completely innocent. Why are you asking? The defensiveness in her voice was so thick you could spread it on toast. It was beautiful, really, watching someone try to act innocent when they're about as subtle as a neon sign in a blackout. Oh, no reason, I said, taking a bite of my toast and channeling my inner concerned but not suspicious husband. I just want to make sure I'm, cool with everything. I don't want to be that guy who gets all weird and possessive. That's not attractive, right? I gave her my best puppy dog eyes, the ones that said, please validate me, instead of, I literally have photographic evidence of your betrayal saved in 3 different cloud storage services. She relaxed immediately, reaching over to pat my hand like I was a golden retriever who'd just learned not to pee on the carpet. Honey, you're being so mature about this. I'm really proud of you. Proud. She was proud of me for being gullible. That's like being proud of a fish for taking the bait. Technically impressive, but also kind of missing the point. Over the next few days, I peppered in more questions, each one carefully calibrated to sound like insecurity wrapped in a desperate attempt to be cool about it. When you see Mason, should I not hold your hand or anything? I don't want to make it awkward. Or my personal favorite. Is Mason the kind of ex who's going to size me up? Should I go to the gym more? I've been meaning to work on my biceps. That last one actually made her laugh, which was rich considering she was the one orchestrating this whole bizarre love triangle situation. But here's where it got really interesting. Sophia, bless her predictable heart, couldn't help but run to her best friend Jenna to gossip about how I was acting. I knew this because Jenna's husband, Derek, is in my fantasy football league, and Derek has the unique superpower of being completely unable to keep his mouth shut during our league draft, which happened to fall right in the middle of my week-long performance. Derek pulled me aside at the bar and said, "Dude, Jenna told me Sophia thinks you're getting controlling about this ex thing. You okay, man?" Controlling. I was asking basic questions about my wife hanging out with her ex-boyfriend, and somehow I was the controlling one. That's like calling the fire department controlling for showing up when your house is burning down. But this was perfect. The rumor machine was running exactly on schedule, which meant Sophia was telling people I was insecure and jealous, setting up the narrative that she was the reasonable one and I was the problem. Classic move, really. If you're going to cheat, might as well paint your husband as the villain first. It's like PR damage control before there's even damage to control. Yeah, man, I'm good, I told Derek, clapping him on the shoulder. Just trying to be supportive, you know? Marriage is all about trust and communication. I said this with a straight face, while internally adding, and surveillance equipment, apparently. Which brings me to the best part of my week, the shopping trip. Wednesday afternoon, while Sophia was at yoga class. Or at least that's where she said she was going. Though at this point she could have been meeting Mason at a hotel, and I wouldn't have been surprised. I went to this electronics store downtown that caters to the kind of people who either really value their security or are planning to catch someone in a lie. The store was called Guardian Tech, which sounds way more legitimate than spy stuff for people with trust issues. The guy behind the counter was maybe 25, with thick-rimmed glasses and a name tag that said Trevor. He had that eager look of someone who'd watched too many spy movies and thought his retail job was actually Mission Impossible. "How can I help you today?" he asked, practically vibrating with excitement. "I need something discreet," I said, keeping my voice low like we were conducting an illegal arms deal instead of buying consumer electronics. "Something that records video and audio without being obvious." Trevor's eyes lit up like I'd just told him Christmas came early. "Oh man, you've come to the right place. We've got everything. Are we talking about, like, home security, or?" He trailed off, his eyebrows raised in a way that said he knew exactly what this was about and was here for all the drama. "Let's just say I'm doing some research," I replied, which was technically true if you consider gathering evidence for divorce proceedings to be research. He showed me everything they had. Cameras disguised as phone chargers, as smoke detectors, even as a coffee thermos, which seemed like overkill unless you suspected your spouse of cheating specifically during your morning commute. But then he pulled out the piece de resistance, a Mont Blanc-style pen that had a tiny camera built into the clip. "This baby records in 1080p HD," Trevor said reverently, handling it like it was a sacred artifact. 4-hour battery life, 32 gigabytes of storage, and it looks exactly like a $200 luxury pen. Nobody ever suspects the pen. "I'll take it," I said immediately, because if I was going to record my wife's betrayal, I was going to do it with class. "Excellent choice. Now, do you want audio too? Because I've got this voice recorder that's about the size of a USB drive. You can clip it inside your jacket pocket, and it'll pick up conversations from 15 feet away. Crystal clear sound quality." I looked at Trevor, this kid who was way too enthusiastic about helping people catch their loved ones in lies, and I thought about how Sophia was probably at that very moment texting Mason about how insecure and controlling I was being. "Yeah," I said. "Give me the recorder too." 20 minutes and $400 later, which I charged to our joint credit card because I'm petty like that, I walked out of Guardian Tech with my new gadgets. Trevor gave me a fist bump and said, "Good luck, man. Get that evidence." I appreciated his solidarity, even if it came from a place of living vicariously through other people's relationship disasters. That evening, I practiced with both devices. The pen camera was genius. It looked completely normal, and the recording quality was insane. The voice recorder was even better, picking up my voice clearly even when I stuffed it in my jacket pocket and walked around the apartment talking to myself like a lunatic. If Sophia wanted to test my calmness, that was fine. I wanted to test her loyalty, and now I had the tools to do it with HD clarity and surround sound. By the end of the week, I had perfected my role. I was the slightly nervous but trying to be cool husband, asking just enough questions to seem insecure without being suspicious, walking the tightrope between concern and acceptance. Sophia was convinced she had me exactly where she wanted me, compliant, trusting, and walking blindly into her test. What she didn't know was that I'd already passed my own test, the test of preparation, of patience, of keeping my cool while gathering everything I needed to expose the truth. She thought she was the one orchestrating this whole thing, but really, she'd just given me a front row seat to her own downfall. And honestly, I couldn't wait for opening night. The bar Sophia picked was called Velvet and Vine, which sounds like either a fancy wine bar or a strip club that's trying really hard to seem classy. Turns out it was the former, though honestly, the prices were so high they might as well have been charging for lap dances. This was one of those places where the cocktail menu reads like poetry nobody asked for, drinks with names like Autumn's Last Whisper and The Bittersweet Goodbye, which, now that I think about it, was probably foreshadowing for my marriage. The lighting was dim in that deliberately romantic way that says, we're sophisticated, but really means, we don't want you to see how small the portions are. I'd spent an extra 20 minutes in the bathroom before we left, making sure my pen camera was clipped perfectly to my shirt pocket and my voice recorder was nestled securely in my jacket. I felt like James Bond, except instead of saving the world, I was just trying to catch my wife being shady. Less glamorous, but hey, everyone's got their mission. Sophia looked amazing, which annoyed me more than it should have. She'd worn this black dress that was just formal enough for a nice bar, but also suggested she'd put in way more effort than someone meeting their husband's approval should require. She'd done that thing with her hair, the beach waves that took 45 minutes and 3 different products but were supposed to look effortless. I recognized the perfume too. It was the expensive one she saved for special occasions, which apparently now included parading her ex-boyfriend in front of her clueless husband. "You look nice," I said as we got out of the Uber, because even when you're gathering evidence for divorce, your mom raised you to have manners. "Thanks, babe," she said, squeezing my hand. "Remember, just be yourself. This is going to be great." The way she said great reminded me of how dentists say you might feel a little pressure right before they drill into your tooth. Nothing described as great in that tone has ever actually been great. We walked into Velvet and Vine at exactly 7:30, which was the time Sophia had chosen because it was not too early, not too late. Apparently, there's a Goldilocks zone for meeting your wife's ex-boyfriend, and who knew? The bar was packed with the kind of people who drink wine at 7:30 on a Friday night and think that makes them cultured. Lots of scarves worn indoors, lots of conversations about things nobody actually cares about, like the notes in their Pinot Noir or the undertones of their craft beer. And there, sitting at a high-top table near the window like he was posing for the cover of Douchebag Monthly, was Mason. Let me paint you a picture of this guy. First off, the hair. It was gelled to absolute perfection, swept back in that style that screams, I spent 30 minutes making this look casual. We're talking enough product in there to waterproof a boat. His shirt was this light blue button-down, unbuttoned just enough to show off his chest hair and probably his weekly gym membership. The sleeves were rolled up to display his forearms, which I'm sure he thought were his best feature, and he was wearing a watch that looked expensive enough to require insurance. The whole vibe was midlife crisis with confidence, like he'd read a manual on how to look successful and followed it to the letter without realizing it made him look like every other guy desperately clinging to his 20s despite being firmly in his 30s. When he saw Sophia, his face lit up like someone had just told him he'd won the lottery and a trip to Cancun. He stood up, and I noticed he was tall, because of course he was, and opened his arms wide. Sophia practically floated over to him, and they hugged for what felt like an entire Netflix episode, including the recap of the previous episode and the credits. I'm talking a solid 20 seconds of embrace, with the kind of back rubbing that suggested they were either really good friends or really bad at hiding an affair. I was betting on option B when they finally separated, and I'd already mentally composed 3 different sarcastic comments about the length of that hug. Mason turned to me with this smile that was all teeth and zero sincerity. "You must be the husband," he said, extending his hand. "Mason, great to finally meet you, man." His handshake was exactly what I expected, firm to the point of being aggressive, the kind that says, I do push-ups, and also, I'm threatened by you, but pretending I'm not. I shook back with just enough pressure to be polite, returning his smile with one of my own. Because while his push-ups were physical, Mine were mental, and buddy, I was doing reps all night long. Nice to meet you too, I said, lying through my teeth so smoothly I almost impressed myself. I've heard a lot about you. That part was actually true. I'd heard he was a tool, and so far, the evidence was overwhelming. We sat down, and immediately the awkwardness descended like a fog. Sophia was playing hostess, trying to facilitate conversation like we were all old friends instead of two guys, and the woman currently betraying one of them. So, Mason just got promoted, she said brightly, looking at him with pride that made my eye twitch. He's VP of Marketing now at Sterling Corporation. Wow, congratulations, I said, making sure my pen camera had a clear angle on both of them. That's impressive. Mason leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd never been humbled by life. Yeah, it's been a wild ride. The company's growing like crazy, and they basically gave me free rein to build my own team. The salary's insane, the benefits are incredible, and I just leased a new BMW M5. He said BMW M5 the way most people say, I cured cancer. Like it was an achievement that would be remembered throughout history. That's great, I said, taking a sip of my water because I needed to stay sharp and also because I wasn't about to spend $15 on a drink called Melancholy Muse or whatever pretentious garbage they had on the menu here. But Mason was just getting started. For the next hour, and I mean a full, excruciating 60 minutes, this man talked about himself with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for new parents showing you photos of their baby. Except instead of a baby, it was his career, his car, his new apartment in the trendy part of downtown, his gym routine, his vacation to Bali, and his thoughts on cryptocurrency, which nobody asked for, but he delivered anyway. The key to success, he said at one point, swirling his whiskey like he was in a commercial, is knowing your worth and not settling. That's what I've always done. He glanced at Sophia when he said this, and she giggled. Actually giggled, like he'd just said something profound instead of the kind of generic motivational poster nonsense you find on Instagram. Sophia was eating it up. Every brag, every story, every casual mention of how successful and amazing he was. She responded like he was performing a stand-up special at Madison Square Garden. Her laugh was too loud, too frequent, too everything. She touched his arm when she laughed, leaned in when he talked, and basically forgot I was sitting there except when she'd occasionally glance over to make sure I was watching her little performance. I just nodded along, made appropriate sounds, and sipped my overpriced water while thinking, wow, I'm literally paying to watch my wife flirt with her ex-boyfriend. This is my life now. I'm funding my own humiliation, and it comes with a lemon twist and ambient jazz music in the background. The bartender came by, and Sophia ordered something called The Forgotten Affair, which was either incredibly ironic or incredibly on the nose. I couldn't decide which. Mason got another whiskey, top shelf obviously, and I stuck with water because someone at this table needed to maintain their dignity, and it clearly wasn't going to be the other two. Mason launched into another story, this one about closing some big deal that made him look like a hero, and I watched Sophia's face as she listened. Her eyes were bright, her smile was genuine, and she was looking at him the way she used to look at me back when we first started dating, before marriage became routine and I became the boring husband who didn't drive a BMW or have hair that defied gravity. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Marcus. How's it going? You alive? I typed back under the table. Barely. This is worse than dental surgery without anesthesia. His response was immediate. Get that evidence and get out. You got this, brother. I looked up at Mason, who was now explaining his fitness routine in detail that nobody requested, and at Sophia, who was hanging on every word like he was revealing the secrets of the universe instead of describing his protein shake recipe. The voice recorder in my jacket was capturing every word, every laugh, every moment of this absolute circus. And all I could think was, these two deserve each other. And I deserve so much better than this. About 90 minutes into this torture session, yes, I was keeping track, because when you're living through a nightmare you tend to count the minutes until you can wake up. Something shifted in the atmosphere. Maybe it was the 3 whiskeys Mason had consumed, or maybe it was just that both he and Sophia had forgotten that I was an actual human being with functioning ears and not just a decorative husband-shaped prop at their table. Either way, the mask started to slip, and what was underneath was exactly as ugly as I'd expected. Mason leaned back in his chair, and I could see that look in his eyes. That particular combination of alcohol-fueled confidence and stupidity that makes men think they're invincible. It's the same look guys get right before they try to jump off a roof into a pool and end up in the emergency room. He was feeling himself, as the kids say, and he was about to make a mistake that would cost him everything. I could see it coming like watching a car crash in slow motion, except I was rooting for the crash. He looked at me with this smirk that made me want to punch his perfectly straight teeth down his throat, and said, "You know, man, I gotta be honest with you." Oh, this was going to be good. I leaned forward slightly, making sure my pen camera had the perfect angle. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice neutral and curious, like I was genuinely interested in whatever wisdom this clown was about to drop. "Sophia used to like confident guys," he said, gesturing with his whiskey glass in a way that I'm sure he thought looked cool, but actually just looked sloppy. Guys who knew what they wanted and went after it. No hesitation, no second guessing, just pure alpha energy. He actually said alpha energy with a straight face, which took a special kind of delusion. Guess she's trying the quiet type now, huh? The insult was so thinly veiled, it was practically transparent. He might as well have said, "I'm surprised she married someone so boring compared to me," and saved us all the trouble of decoding his garbage. But what really got me, what made my blood pressure spike and my jaw clench, was Sophia's reaction. She didn't defend me, didn't shut him down, didn't do any of the things a wife should do when someone disrespects her husband. Instead, she laughed. And not just a polite chuckle, but a full-on, head thrown back, hand over her mouth laugh like he'd just delivered the punchline to the funniest joke she'd ever heard. She laughed so hard I genuinely thought she might choke on her overpriced cocktail, and honestly, at that moment, I wouldn't have performed the Heimlich. I felt my face get hot, felt that familiar surge of anger and humiliation mixing together in my chest like a toxic cocktail. But I'd come too far to lose my cool now. I'd spent a week playing the insecure husband, gathering evidence, setting up this entire operation. I wasn't about to blow it because Mason wanted to flex his ego and Sophia wanted to stroke it. So instead of doing what every fiber of my being wanted me to do, which was flip the table and walk out, I smiled. I gave him my friendliest, most genuine-looking smile and said, "I'm fine with quiet. Makes it easier to hear nonsense in 4K. For a second, just a brief, beautiful second, confusion flickered across Mason's face. Sophia stopped laughing mid-giggle, and there was this moment where they both looked at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. The comment was just vague enough that they couldn't tell if I was insulting them or making a weird joke. Perfect. Keep them off balance. Keep them comfortable enough to keep talking. Mason recovered first, his ego too inflated to stay deflated for long. He laughed. That forced, uncomfortable laugh people do when they're not sure if they should be offended, and took another sip of his whiskey. "You're funny, man. I like that." "Thanks," I said flatly. "I'm hilarious. But here's the thing about drunk, arrogant people. They can't help themselves. Give them enough rope, and they'll not only hang themselves, they'll braid the rope first and make it look pretty." Mason was no exception. He was on a roll, riding high on whiskey and the belief that he was smarter than everyone else in the room, and I was about to give him all the rope he needed. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice to something conspiratorial, something that suggested I was about to have a bro-to-bro moment with him. Sophia was reapplying her lipstick, because apparently this was a date for her, and wasn't paying close attention. Perfect timing. "Look, Mason," I said, making my voice sound vulnerable, almost pleading. "I trust Sophia. I really do. But I just need to hear it from you, man to man, that there's nothing going on. Just for my peace of mind, you know?" This was the bait. I'd made myself look weak, insecure, desperate for reassurance. I'd basically gift-wrapped an opportunity for him to either do the right thing and reassure me that everything was innocent, or do the wrong thing and reveal exactly what kind of person he was. Want to guess which option he chose? Mason's eyes lit up like I'd just handed him a microphone and told him the floor was his. This was his moment to shine, his chance to prove how superior he was, how much control he had. He took another sip of his whiskey, set the glass down with exaggerated care, and leaned forward with a grin that would have made the Cheshire Cat look subtle. "Look, man," he said, and I could hear the condescension dripping from every word like honey laced with poison. "I'm going to be real with you. Nothing serious is going on. He emphasized serious in a way that made it crystal clear something was definitely going on. It just didn't meet his definition of serious. It's just memories, history. The kind of connection that doesn't just go away because someone puts a ring on. He glanced at Sophia, who had finished with her lipstick and was now watching our conversation with wide eyes that looked thrilled and nervous at the same time. And maybe we're making a few new memories too. Right, Soph? Sophomore. He called her Sophomore. Like they had cute nicknames for each other. Like they were a couple instead of two people actively destroying my marriage while I sat there documenting it in high definition. Sophia's face turned red. Not embarrassed red, but blushing red, like a teenager whose crush just acknowledged her existence. She giggled again, that same infuriating giggle that made me want to pour my water over both their heads, and swatted Mason's arm playfully. "Mason, stop," she said, but her tone had zero conviction. It was the kind of stop that really means, "Please continue. I'm loving this attention." "Stop what?" Mason said, grinning wider now, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd just confessed to everything on camera with audio backup. "I'm just being honest. That's what friends do, right? We're all adults here." "Adults." "Right. Because adults definitely publicly flirt with their ex while their husband sits there watching. That's peak maturity, truly the height of evolved human behavior. I should write a book about it. How to be an adult. A guide to betraying your spouse while pretending it's totally normal." I sat back in my chair, my face carefully neutral, and said, "Yeah, honesty's important." My voice didn't waver, didn't crack, didn't betray the fact that internally I was doing a victory dance. I had it all. The confession, the flirting, the complete lack of respect for our marriage. All captured in glorious 1080p HD with crystal clear audio. This was better than I'd hoped for. I'd been expecting maybe some suspicious behavior, some suggestive comments I could interpret as evidence. Instead, Mason had basically stood up, grabbed a megaphone, and announced to the world that he was messing around with my wife. The beauty of it was that neither of them realized what had just happened. Sophia looked relieved that I was taking it so well, probably thinking her test was a success, and I'd proven myself to be the docile, accepting husband she wanted. Mason looked pleased with himself for being so honest and real, like he deserved a medal for admitting he was a homewrecker. They were both so caught up in their own little world, so convinced of their own cleverness, that they couldn't see the trap snapping shut around them. I checked my watch, a subtle movement that also gave me a chance to make sure my pen was still recording. 10:15. We'd been here for almost 3 hours, though it felt like 3 years. I'd gotten everything I needed, and then some. Time to make my exit. "Well," I said, finishing the last of my water, "this has been enlightening." There's this moment in every disaster movie where the hero walks away from the explosion in slow motion, doesn't look back, and somehow manages to look cool despite the fact that everything behind them is literally on fire. I'd always thought those scenes were ridiculous, overly dramatic, completely unrealistic. Turns out, I was wrong. Because sitting in that bar, watching my wife and her ex-boyfriend giggle like they were the only two people in the room, I finally understood the appeal of the dramatic exit. Sometimes you don't need explosions. Sometimes you just need the ability to stand up, dust yourself off, and leave with your dignity intact while everyone else is still figuring out what just happened. Sophia was riding high on what she perceived as her victory. After Mason's little confession, which, by the way, was still being recorded by the pen camera currently getting a crystal clear view of both their faces, she turned to me with this expression of pure pride, like a teacher whose student just passed a really difficult test. Her eyes were practically glowing with self-satisfaction, and she reached across the table to grab my hand in what I'm sure she thought was a tender, meaningful gesture, but really just felt like someone trying to pet a dog they'd just kicked. "Well done," she said, squeezing my fingers with fake affection that made my skin crawl. "You passed." Passed. I'd passed her little loyalty test, her emotional maturity examination, her check to see if I was the kind of husband who'd sit quietly while she paraded her affair partner in front of me under the guise of being evolved and secure. And in her mind, I'd aced it with flying colors. I'd been calm. I'd been friendly. I'd even engaged in conversation with Mason like we were all buddies hanging out instead of what this actually was, a front row seat to my marriage's funeral. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She thought I'd passed her test, when really, she'd just failed mine spectacularly. She'd failed the basic human decency test, the wedding vows test, the don't openly flirt with your ex in front of your husband test, and several other tests she didn't even know she was taking. But sure, Sophia, I passed. Let's go with that. I looked at her hand holding mine, then up at her face with that proud smile, then over at Mason who was leaning back in his chair like the king of the world, and I felt this wave of absolute clarity wash over me. This was it. This was my moment. Not to explode, not to cause a scene, not to give them the drama they were probably secretly hoping for so Sophia could paint me as the unstable, jealous husband. No, this was my moment to show them exactly what kind of man I was. Calm, collected, done. I smiled at Sophia, and it was a real smile this time because I was genuinely happy. Happy that this charade was over. Happy that I'd gotten everything I needed. Happy that in about 24 hours, both of their lives were going to implode in ways they couldn't even imagine yet. Good to know, I said, my voice steady and almost cheerful. I pulled my hand away from hers gently, stood up from my chair, and straightened my jacket, making sure my voice recorder was secure. You two enjoy the encore. For a second, nobody moved. Sophia's smile faltered, her eyebrows knitting together in confusion like I'd just spoken in ancient Greek. Mason stopped mid-sip of his whiskey, the glass frozen halfway to his mouth. Even the couple at the table next to us, who'd been having what looked like a very intense discussion about whether almond milk was better than oat milk, paused to look over at our table. Wait, what? Sophia said, her voice climbing an octave. Where are you going? Home, I said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Because it was. I reached into my wallet. The wallet I'd bought with my own money from my own job that actually required me to work instead of just bragging about working, and pulled out 3 crisp $20 bills. I dropped them on the table with a casual flick of my wrist, making sure they landed right in the middle between Sophia's half-finished cocktail and Mason's whiskey. That should cover your drinks. And dessert, if you want it. I hear the chocolate lava cake is good here, though it's probably not as sweet as whatever this is. Mason finally found his voice, sitting up straighter and putting his glass down with a thunk that was probably meant to sound authoritative, but just came off as startled. Dude, come on, don't be like that. We're all just having a good time here. Oh, I know, I said, and I couldn't help the slight smirk that crossed my face. You two are having a great time. That's why I'm leaving. So you can have an even better one without me here ruining the vibe. I gestured between them with a little wave. Don't let me stop the show. Please, continue making new memories. I insist. Sophia stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor with a screech that made half the bar look over. You're being ridiculous, she hissed, trying to keep her voice low but failing miserably. This is exactly what I was testing, whether you could handle a simple dinner without getting jealous and insecure. And I handled it beautifully, I said, buttoning my jacket like I was getting ready for a business meeting instead of walking out on my marriage. I sat here, I listened, I smiled. I was the picture of maturity. But maturity also means knowing when to leave. And sweetheart, I looked directly into her eyes, making sure she could see that I wasn't angry, wasn't upset, wasn't anything except absolutely done. It's time to leave. The bartender had wandered over, probably sensing drama and wanting to make sure nobody was about to start throwing punches or glasses. He was a young guy, maybe mid-20s, with a man bun and the kind of meticulously groomed beard that required more maintenance than most people's lawns. Is everything okay here, folks? He asked, his eyes darting between the 3 of us like he was trying to figure out which one of us was most likely to cause a problem. Everything's perfect, I said, giving him a genuine smile. Just settling the tab. Those 2 are staying. I'm heading out. I pulled out another 20 and handed it directly to him. That's for you. Thanks for the excellent service and for pretending you didn't hear any of this extremely awkward conversation. The bartender's face broke into a grin as he pocketed the 20. Didn't hear a thing, my man. You have a good night. The way he said it, with just a hint of sympathy and respect, told me he'd absolutely heard everything and was silently rooting for me. Bartenders see it all, and this guy had clearly witnessed enough relationship drama to recognize when someone was making a dignified exit from a sinking ship. Sophia grabbed my arm, her nails digging in just enough to be uncomfortable. Don't you dare leave, she said, her voice tight with anger, and what might have been panic. We're not done here. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face. Actually, we are? We're very done. I gently but firmly removed her hand, patting it twice like you'd pat a child who was having a tantrum. But hey, look on the bright side. You passed your test too. You proved you could meet up with your ex without your husband getting in the way. Mission accomplished. Mason, who'd been watching this entire exchange with growing discomfort, finally stood up. Look, man, I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I interrupted, holding up a hand to stop him. Everything's been understood perfectly. Crystal clear, in fact. I looked at both of them. These two people who'd spent the evening treating me like I was too stupid to see what was right in front of my face. You two have a wonderful rest of your evening. Really, enjoy every minute of it. And then I did it. I turned around and walked toward the exit without another word, without looking back, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing me angry or hurt, or anything except completely calm. The bar seemed quieter as I walked through it. Or maybe that was just my imagination, but I swear I could feel eyes on me from other tables. The couple who'd been arguing about milk alternatives gave me a subtle nod. A woman sitting alone at the bar raised her glass slightly in what looked like a salute. Even the hostess by the door looked at me with something like respect as I passed. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside, and I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the smell of the city, car exhaust, someone's cigarette smoke, the vague scent of rain that might come later. Behind me, I could hear Sophia's voice rising, probably arguing with Mason about whose fault it was that I'd left, probably trying to figure out if this was part of my plan or if I'd genuinely just snapped. I pulled out my phone and ordered an Uber. Estimated arrival, for minutes. Perfect. I stood there on the sidewalk, straightening my jacket one more time, feeling the weight of the pen camera in my pocket and the voice recorder in my jacket. Evidence secured. Mission accomplished. Marriage over. And honestly, I felt lighter than I had in months. No yelling, no scene, no dramatic music, just me, the night, and the sweet, sweet silence of victory. They'd expected an explosion, fireworks, a big emotional breakdown they could use to justify their behavior later. Instead, they got a calm man with a plan, and let me tell you something, that's way scarier than any tantrum could ever be. My Uber pulled up, a silver Toyota Camry driven by a guy named Eduardo who had a 5-star rating and, blessedly, didn't try to make conversation. I got in, closed the door, and as we pulled away from Velvet and Vine, I finally allowed myself a real smile. Enjoy the encore, indeed. The Uber ride home was about 15 minutes of pure, uninterrupted peace. Eduardo was my kind of driver, the kind who understood that sometimes people get in cars because they need to sit in silence and process the fact that their marriage just died in a fancy wine bar. He had some smooth jazz playing quietly in the background, and the only thing he said to me the entire trip was, "Have a good night, brother," when I got out. 5 stars, big tip, absolute legend. My apartment felt different when I walked in. Bigger somehow. Quieter. Like the universe had already started the process of removing Sophia from the space, even though her stuff was still everywhere. Her shoes by the door, her jacket on the coat rack, her collection of decorative pillows on the couch that served no functional purpose except to annoy me every time I wanted to sit down. I looked at all of it and felt nothing. No sadness, no anger, just this weird sense of relief, like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. First things first, I needed to see what I'd captured. I went straight to my home office, a small second bedroom that Sophia had always complained was wasted space, because I could have turned it into a yoga room or whatever, and fired up my laptop. The pen camera connected via USB, and within seconds, I was downloading the footage. The little progress bar crawled across the screen. 38%, 47%, 63%. And I felt like a kid on Christmas morning waiting to open presents. Except my present was video evidence of my wife's betrayal, and I was way more excited about it than was probably healthy. While that downloaded, I grabbed a beer from the fridge. A nice IPA I'd been saving for a special occasion, and if this wasn't special, I didn't know what was, and settled into my desk chair. My hands were surprisingly steady as I opened the video file. I'd half expected to feel nervous or anxious, but instead, I felt like a film director about to watch the rough cut of his masterpiece. The video quality was insane. Trevor from Guardian Tech hadn't been lying. This thing recorded in 1080p HD that would make a professional videographer jealous. I could see everything. Mason's smug face, Sophia's body language as she leaned toward him, the way her hand kept finding reasons to touch his arm. The audio from my voice recorder was even better, picking up every word with the clarity of a studio recording. I watched the whole thing start to finish, taking notes on the timestamps of the best moments. There was Mason at 12:47, talking about how Sophia used to like confident guys, while she laughed like he was the funniest person alive. At 28:33, there was Sophia touching his arm for the fourth time in 10 minutes. And the crown jewel, the absolute piece de resistance, was at 1 hour 42 minutes and 15 seconds. Mason's confession about making new memories, while Sophia blushed and giggled like a teenager. Beautiful, I said out loud to my empty apartment, taking a sip of my beer. Absolutely beautiful. But here's the thing about revenge. And yes, let's call it what it is, because I'm not going to pretend this was anything noble or mature. If you're going to do it, you have to do it right. Half-assing revenge is like half-assing a cooking recipe. You end up with something that looks okay, but doesn't quite satisfy. I needed more information. I needed context. I needed to know exactly where to hit Mason where it would hurt the most. So I did what any reasonable person in the digital age does when they want to ruin someone's life. I started Googling. Mason plus Sterling Corp brought up his LinkedIn profile immediately, because of course this guy had LinkedIn set to public. His profile picture looked like a professional headshot for an actor who exclusively played villains in Hallmark movies. The bio was exactly what you'd expect. Buzzwords like innovative, dynamic, results-driven, and other meaningless corporate garbage that people put on resumes to sound important. But then I scrolled down to his recent activity, and that's when I hit the jackpot. 3 weeks ago, Mason had posted a photo from what looked like a fancy restaurant with the caption, "Celebrating with my beautiful fiancé. #blessed, #luckyman, #future husband." The post had 247 likes and about 30 comments, all variations of congratulations, and you two are perfect together. Fiancé. Mason had a fiancé. My wife's ex-boyfriend, the one she was currently making new memories with, was engaged to someone else. The hypocrisy was so thick I could spread it on toast. I clicked on the photo he was tagged with, because people who post engagement announcements always tag everyone involved like they're collecting Pokemon, and found myself staring at a profile for Clara Sterling. Her profile was more private, but her profile picture showed a pretty blonde woman in her late 20s, smiling at the camera with the kind of genuine happiness that made me feel bad for what I was about to do. Almost. Not quite, but almost. Clara Sterling. That name sounded familiar. I opened a new tab and searched Clara Sterling Sterling Corp, and suddenly everything clicked into place like the most satisfying puzzle in the world. Clara Sterling was the daughter of Robert Sterling, the CEO and founder of Sterling Corporation, the company where Mason worked. The same company where Mason had just been promoted to VP of Marketing. The same company where Mason apparently thought he could climb the corporate ladder by climbing into the boss's daughter's bed. I sat back in my chair and laughed. Actually laughed out loud, at the sheer audacity of it all. Mason wasn't just a cheater, he was a strategic cheater. He was engaged to the CEO's daughter, probably for the career benefits as much as anything else, and he was risking all of it to hook up with his ex-girlfriend who happened to be my wife. The man wasn't just playing with fire, he was dousing himself in gasoline and juggling torches. "Oh, Mason," I said to my computer screen, shaking my head with mock sympathy. "You're not just cheating. You're auditioning to be unemployed, single, and probably homeless all in one go. That takes a special kind of stupid." I spent the next hour doing more research, finding Robert Sterling's contact information. His email was publicly available on the Sterling Corp website because CEOs apparently like to pretend they're accessible. And Clara's email, which I found through a corporate directory that listed her as Special Projects Coordinator, which is corporate speak for the boss's daughter, who we gave a fancy title to. Then came the fun part, editing the video. I'm not a professional video editor, but I know my way around basic software, and honestly, I didn't need to do much. The footage spoke for itself. I pulled the best clips. Mason's bragging, his comment about Sophia liking confident guys, the making new memories confession, Sophia's reactions, the inappropriate touching, all of it. I added timestamps in the corner, so there was no question about when this happened, and I included a brief title card at the beginning that simply said, "Recorded. Today's date, Velvet and Vine Bar, 7:30 p.m. to 10:15 p.m." The final product was 3 minutes and 47 seconds of pure, unfiltered evidence. No music, no fancy editing, no dramatic effects. Just raw footage that clearly showed Mason and Sophia acting like a couple while I sat there like a prop. It was perfect in its simplicity. I created a new email account. No point using my real one for this, and spent a solid 20 minutes crafting the message. It needed to be professional, not vindictive. Factual, not emotional. The kind of email that couldn't be dismissed as the rantings of a jealous husband. Subject line, important information regarding Mason, last name. Body, Dear Ms. Sterling and Mr. Sterling, I am writing to provide you with information that I believe you have the right to know. The attached video was recorded this evening at Velvet and Vine Bar and shows Mason, who I understand is engaged to Clara Sterling and employed at Sterling Corporation, engaging in inappropriate conduct with a married woman. The footage speaks for itself. I am sharing this purely for informational purposes, as I believe both of you deserve to know the truth about the person you've trusted. The video is unedited and unaltered. All timestamps are accurate. I apologize for being the bearer of bad news, but I felt it was the right thing to do. Respectfully, a concerned party. Short, sweet, professional, devastating. I attached the video file, checked the email addresses one more time, Clara's personal email and Robert's corporate one, and then I hovered my cursor over the send button. This was it. The point of no return. Once I hit send, Mason's life would implode faster than a building in a controlled demolition. His engagement would be over, his job would probably be gone, his reputation would be destroyed. And Sophia? Well, she'd lose her affair partner and have to face the consequences of her actions. Did I feel guilty? Not even a little bit. They'd made their choices, and now they got to live with the consequences. I was just helping the truth along. Providing a public service, really. I took a sip of my beer, smiled at the screen, and clicked send. The email whooshed into the digital void. Delivered. I leaned back in my chair, laced my fingers behind my head, and whispered to the universe, "Justice has entered the chat." I slept like a baby that night. And I mean a real baby, not the romanticized version people talk about. I'm talking deep, uninterrupted, drool-on-the-pillow sleep that usually only happens after you've had 3 glasses of wine or finally finished binge-watching a series that's been stressing you out for weeks. No nightmares, no guilty conscience keeping me awake, no second-guessing my decisions. Just pure, blissful unconsciousness punctuated by dreams about absolutely nothing important. It was glorious. I woke up naturally around 8:30, which is late for me on a Saturday. The sun was streaming through the bedroom window. Sophia's blackout curtains had always blocked it, but she wasn't here to complain about the light, was she? And I actually felt refreshed. Energized, even. Like I'd just completed a marathon and my body was flooding with endorphins. Except my marathon was destroying my cheating wife's affair, and I didn't even have to leave my apartment to do it. I stretched, yawned, and reached for my phone on the nightstand, figuring I'd check the weather and maybe order some breakfast from that bagel place down the street that makes everything bagels so good they should be illegal. What I found instead was absolute chaos in digital form, and it was more satisfying than any bagel could ever be. 47 missed calls. I'm not exaggerating, 47. My phone's call log looked like a CVS receipt, just scrolling and scrolling with no end in sight. 18 text messages, ranging from one-word please to full paragraphs of panic. 3 voicemails, each one progressively more desperate than the last. And one message that stood out from all the others, a text from a number I didn't have saved but recognized from last night's festivities. The first voicemail was from Mason, and I have to say, the man's voice had completely changed from the cocky, confident tone he'd used at the bar. Gone was the smooth-talking VP of marketing who bragged about his BMW and his alpha energy. Instead, I got what sounded like a wounded animal crossed with a teenage boy whose mom just found his browser history. "Dude," he started, his voice cracking like he was going through puberty again. "You need to call me back. Right now? This is not cool, man. Whatever you think happened, whatever you think you saw, you got it wrong. We were catching up, that's all. You can't." His voice broke completely, and I swear I heard a sob. An actual sob. "You can't do this to me. Call me back. Please. I deleted it without a second thought and moved on to voicemail number 2, which was even better. This time, Mason had abandoned any pretense of dignity and gone straight to begging. Oh God, what did you do? Clara won't answer my calls. Her dad is. I don't even know what to say. You ruined my life, man. You ruined it. Over what? Over nothing. We were just talking. Just catching up. You recorded us without permission. That's illegal. I could sue you. I could. The message cut off there, probably because he'd hit the time limit, which is really just poetic timing if you ask me. The third voicemail was my personal favorite. By this point, Mason had apparently cycled through denial and anger and landed squarely on bargaining, which, if I remembered my grief stages correctly, meant depression and acceptance were right around the corner. I couldn't wait. Please, he whispered, and he actually sounded like he was crying. Full-on tears, the kind that makes your voice all nasally and pathetic. Please, just tell me what you want. Money? I can get you money. You want an apology? I'll apologize. I'll apologize to you. To everyone. I'll never talk to Sophia again, I swear. Just please tell Clara and her dad that it was all a misunderstanding. Tell them the video was edited, that you made it look worse than it was. I'll do anything. Anything. My career is over. My engagement is over. Everything is over. Please. I sat there in bed, phone in hand, and I smiled so wide my face hurt. No, Mason, I said out loud to my empty bedroom. You ruined it. I just provided the soundtrack. The line was so good I'd used it in a text response to him earlier, but it bore repeating because it was absolutely true. I didn't make him cheat on his fiancée. I didn't make him publicly flirt with a married woman. I didn't make him confess to making new memories while her husband sat 3 feet away. All I did was make sure the right people saw what he'd already done. But the voicemails were just the appetizer. The text messages were the main course, and they did not disappoint. Mason had apparently been texting me throughout the night, probably after his calls went straight to voicemail, because I turned my phone on Do Not Disturb like a civilized person who values his sleep. 2:47 a.m. Why aren't you answering? 2:51 a.m. This isn't funny. 2:53 a.m. Answer your phone. 3:15 a.m. Clara left. She took her ring off and threw it at me. 3:47 a.m. Her dad called. I'm fired. I'm fired. 4:23 a.m. I hope you're happy. 4:25 a.m. Actually, no, I hope you rot. 4:26 a.m. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. 4:27 a.m. Please help me fix this. The progression from anger to panic to desperate pleading was honestly fascinating from a psychological perspective. It was like watching someone go through all 5 stages of grief in real time. Except instead of grief, it was consequences. And instead of sympathy, I felt absolutely nothing except mild amusement. I scrolled through the rest. More begging, more accusations, more promises to never speak to Sophia again. And then I did what any mature adult would do. I blocked his number. Not because I was angry, but because I simply didn't care enough to keep reading his meltdown. He wasn't my problem anymore. He was his own problem, and Clara's problem, and Robert Sterling's problem, but definitely not mine. Speaking of Robert Sterling, I decided to do a little morning reading with my coffee. I opened up my laptop, still sitting on my desk from last night, and Googled Sterling Corporation Mason. And there it was, right at the top of the search results, a headline from the Business Journal that had been posted just 2 hours ago. Sterling Corp. Executive terminated for unethical behavior. I clicked on the article with the eagerness of a kid opening a birthday present. The piece was professional, carefully worded to avoid any legal issues, but the message was crystal clear. Mason had been terminated effective immediately for conduct unbecoming of a Sterling Corporation executive in violation of company ethics policies. The article mentioned that he'd been separated from his position after evidence of inappropriate behavior came to light, which was corporate speak for, we saw the video and fired his ass so fast, he probably got whiplash. The best part? There was a quote from Robert Sterling himself. At Sterling Corporation, we hold our executives to the highest standards of personal and professional conduct. When those standards are not met, we take swift and decisive action. We wish Mr. Mason's last name well in his future endeavors. We wish him well in his future endeavors, as CEO speak for. Good luck finding another job after we blacklist you in the industry. and I loved every word of it. Somewhere in the city, Robert Sterling had watched that video, seen some cocky VP hitting on another woman while engaged to his daughter, and brought down the corporate hammer with extreme prejudice. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the good stuff I'd been saving, because today was definitely a celebration, and actually said cheers to my laptop screen before taking a sip. Somewhere out there, Mason was probably sitting in his overpriced apartment, unemployed, single, and realizing that his BMW M5 lease was going to be really hard to pay without that VP salary. Karma didn't just come for him. It showed up in a luxury car, ran him over, backed up, and ran him over again for good measure. My phone buzzed with a new text, and for a second I thought Mason had figured out how to text from a different number. But no, this was from Sophia's best friend Jenna. The message was short and to the point. I saw the video. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I stared at that text for a long moment. Jenna had been Sophia's friend for years, had been in our wedding, had come to our apartment for dinner parties and game nights. And now she was apologizing to me, which meant she'd somehow seen the video too. Either Clara had sent it to people, or Robert had, or maybe it was making the rounds in their social circle. Either way, the truth was spreading faster than gossip at a high school reunion. I typed back, "Not your fault. Thanks for reaching out." Her response came immediately. "If you need anything, let me know." What she did was wrong. It's funny how quickly people's allegiances shift when they're confronted with actual evidence instead of carefully crafted narratives. Jenna had probably been hearing Sophia's version of events. Poor Sophia with her controlling, jealous husband who couldn't handle her having male friends. But one video had shattered that illusion completely. My apartment intercom buzzed, loud and jarring, interrupting my coffee and schadenfreude. I walked over and pressed the button. "Yes, it's me." Sophia's voice came through the speaker, tight and strained. "We need to talk." I looked at the intercom, then at my coffee, then back at the intercom. The fallout had officially arrived at my doorstep. And honestly, I couldn't wait. I stood there staring at the intercom like it was a snake that had just asked me politely if I wanted to get bitten. Sophia's voice came through again, more insistent this time. "I know you're there. Your car is in the garage. Open the door. We need to talk about this like adults." Adults. There was that word again, being thrown around by people who had no idea what it actually meant. Adults don't cheat on their spouses. Adults don't parade their affair partners in front of their husbands under the guise of tests. And adults definitely don't show up at the apartment they just got kicked out of and demand to be let in like they have any right to be there. I pressed the button. "We don't have anything to talk about, Sophia. Don't be ridiculous." Her voice was climbing into that register that used to make me cave in arguments, that pitch that suggested I was being unreasonable, and if I'd just listened to her side of things, everything would make sense. "You sent that video to Clara and her dad? That's insane. Do you know what you've done? Mason lost his job. His engagement is over. You ruined his life over nothing." Over nothing? She actually said nothing. Like I'd overreacted to her holding hands with her ex at a cafe, laughing at all his jokes, touching his arm every 5 minutes, and listening to him confess they were making new memories together. Yeah, total overreaction on my part. I should have just smiled and asked if they wanted me to take pictures for their scrapbook. "Sophia," I said calmly, "go home." "This is my home," she screamed, and the intercom crackled with the volume. "You can't just kick me out. I live here." "Actually," I said, and I couldn't help the small smile that crossed my face. "You don't. Not anymore." I let go of the intercom button and walked back to my coffee. She could buzz all she wanted. I wasn't opening that door for a conversation. I'd said everything I needed to say last night when I walked out of that bar, and anything else would just be her trying to manipulate me into feeling guilty for exposing the truth. The buzzing started again, and again, and again. She was just holding the button down now, creating one long, continuous buzz that sounded like an angry hornet trapped in my wall. I turned up the volume on my TV, college football highlights, perfect Saturday morning viewing, and let her buzz herself into exhaustion. After about 10 minutes of nonstop buzzing, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Same number. Voicemail. Third time, I answered just to see what would happen. "You're being childish." Sophia's voice exploded from my speaker before I could even say hello. "Just open the door." I made a mistake, okay? Is that what you want to hear? I made a mistake. A mistake. Singular. Like this was one oopsie, one little error in judgment. Instead of a calculated series of choices that led to her emotionally cheating on me with her ex-boyfriend while testing whether I was secure enough to watch it happen. No, Sophia, I said, my voice steady and almost bored. What I want is for you to leave. But since you're not doing that, I'm going to help you understand the situation. I walked over to my desk, pulled out the folder I'd prepared last night after sending the emails, because I'm nothing if not thorough, and headed to my front door. I opened it just wide enough to stick my arm through, holding a single piece of paper. Sophia was standing there in yesterday's clothes, mascara smudged under her eyes like a raccoon who'd had a really rough night. Her hair that had been so perfectly styled for her date with Mason now a mess. She looked terrible, and I felt absolutely nothing except maybe mild satisfaction. She reached for the paper, but I pulled it back slightly. Let me summarize for you, I said. Your belongings are packed. Professional movers are arriving at 2 p.m. The door code has been changed. The locks have been changed. You're not on the lease. Never were, because I signed it before we got married and never added you. This apartment is mine. You need to leave. Her face went through about 15 different emotions in 3 seconds. Shock, anger, disbelief, panic, and then this desperate pleading that would have worked on me a week ago, but now just felt like watching a bad actress audition for a soap opera. You can't do this, she whispered, and actual tears started forming in her eyes. Real ones this time, not the manipulative kind she'd pull out when she wanted something. This is my home. Our home. You can't just... Congrats. I interrupted, holding the paper out again. You passed my test. She grabbed the paper, her hands shaking, and read it. I'd kept it simple. Your belongings are packed. Movers arrive at 2 p.m. Passcode changed. Congrats, you passed my test. Short, sweet, devastating. What test? She said, looking up at me with confusion breaking through her tears. The loyalty test, I said simply. Turns out you failed it spectacularly. Have a nice life, Sophia. I closed the door. The lock clicked. And from the other side, I heard her start crying. Not the gentle, delicate crying of a woman who's sad, but the ugly, loud sobbing of someone who's just realized they've lost everything and it's entirely their own fault. The buzzing started again, more frantic this time, mixed with pounding on the door. Please, please, just let me explain. It wasn't what it looked like. Nothing happened. We were just friends. You're overreacting. I sat back down on my couch, turned up the TV a little more, and waited. She'd get tired eventually. They always do. By 1:30, the hallway had finally gone quiet. Either Sophia had left to regroup, or she'd passed out from emotional exhaustion. Either way worked for me. I'd changed into a clean shirt, ordered a pizza for lunch, because emotional devastation makes me hungry, apparently, and was mentally preparing for Act 2 of the goodbye parade. At exactly 2 p.m., like clockwork, my intercom buzzed. Moving company for apartment 4B, a professional male voice said. Come on up, I replied, buzzing them in. I'd hired Golden State Movers, a company with great reviews that specialized in discreet relocations, which was code for, we help people kick out their cheating spouses without drama. I'd paid extra for their premium service, which included packing everything, moving it to a storage unit I'd rented in Sophia's name, and handling any complications that might arise. The guy on the phone had assured me they'd seen it all, and nothing surprised them anymore. 3 guys showed up at my door, 2 built like linebackers, and 1 who looked like he could have been their coach. The leader, whose name tag said Frank, shook my hand with a grip that could crush walnuts. You must be Mr. Johnson. We got your list. Everything in the master bedroom, the walk-in closet, and the items marked with pink tape throughout the apartment. That right? That's right, I said. I'd spent my morning going through the apartment with pink tape, marking everything that belonged to Sophia. Her decorative pillows, her kitchen gadgets I'd never understood the purpose of, her books, her artwork, all of it tagged and ready to go. No problem. We'll have this done in 90 minutes, tops. You staying or going? Staying, I said. I want to make sure nothing of mine accidentally gets packed. Frank nodded like he'd heard that before. Smart man. They'd been working for maybe 20 minutes when the hallway erupted in noise. I heard Sophia's voice before I saw her, shrieking like a banshee who'd just gotten her cable bill. What are you doing? Stop. Those are my things. She appeared in my doorway, must have snuck past the lobby when someone else came in, looking even worse than this morning. She'd clearly been crying for hours. Her face was blotchy and red, and she was wearing sweatpants and a hoodie that I was pretty sure was actually mine, which was ironic given the circumstances. "Ma'am," Frank said, his voice calm but firm, stepping between her and the boxes. "We're just doing our job. If you have an issue, you need to take it up with. This is MY Home." Sophia screamed, and I mean screamed, the kind of volume that makes dogs bark 3 blocks away. "He can't just kick me out. I live here." That's when Gerald showed up. Gerald was our building's security guard, a retired cop in his 60s who'd seen everything in his 40-year career and took exactly zero crap from anyone. He'd probably heard the commotion from the lobby and decided to investigate. "Everything all right here?" Gerald asked, his hand resting casually on his belt in that way cops do that suggests they're ready for anything. "No." Sophia turned to him desperately. "Gerald, tell them. Tell them I live here. He's trying to kick me out. This is illegal." Gerald looked at her, then at me, then pulled out a small notebook from his pocket. "Let me check something." He flipped through a few pages. "Apartment 4B is leased to." He squinted at the page. "Mr. Johnson. Single occupant. No additional residents listed." The look on Sophia's face was absolutely priceless. It was like watching someone realize the waiter just handed them the bill for a meal they didn't order. Confusion, shock, and the slow, dawning horror of understanding. But she stuttered. "According to the lease, ma'am," Gerald continued, his voice professional but with just a hint of satisfaction, "this is not your home. Mr. Johnson has every right to remove your belongings." "Thank you, Gerald," I said from inside the apartment. Sophia stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish, watching as the movers continued their work around her. And honestly, that moment right there made every second of planning, every carefully executed step, absolutely worth it. By 6 p.m., the movers had finished. Gerald had escorted a still protesting Sophia out of the building with a warning that if she came back without permission, she'd be trespassing. And my apartment looked bigger and infinitely better without all her stuff cluttering up the space. Those decorative pillows alone had probably added 10 pounds to the apartment's weight. I cracked open a beer, ordered Thai food. The spicy kind Sophia always said was too much, but I loved, and settled in for what I knew was going to be an entertaining evening of phone calls from people who had opinions about my life. I didn't have to wait long. At 6:47, right as I was digging into my pad thai, my phone lit up with Mom on the caller ID. Not my mom, Sophia's mom, Patricia, who I'd never bothered to remove from my contacts because I'd honestly forgotten she was in there. Patricia was one of those women who believes her daughter can do no wrong, and that any problems in her marriage must somehow be the husband's fault. I'd met her type before. Hell, my own mother had friends like her. Women who treated their adult daughters like precious angels who needed protecting from the big bad world. I let it ring 3 times before answering, mostly because I wanted to finish chewing my noodles. "Hello, Patricia. How could you?" She didn't even bother with a greeting, just jumped straight into the guilt trip like she was diving into a pool. "How could you do this to her?" "She's devastated. Absolutely devastated. She called me crying so hard I could barely understand her." I took another bite of pad thai, chewing slowly while she continued her rant. The beauty of phone calls is that people can't see you rolling your eyes or making faces at them. "Do what to her exactly?" I asked innocently when she paused for breath. "You know what?" Patricia's voice climbed higher, hitting that pitch that only mothers and tea kettles can achieve. "You kicked her out. You changed the locks. You sent that horrible video to poor Mason's fiancé. She made one tiny mistake. One. And you're treating her like she committed murder. One tiny mistake. It's amazing how emotionally cheating with an ex-boyfriend while testing whether I was secure enough to watch becomes one tiny mistake when you're talking to the cheater's mother. I wondered what Patricia would consider a big mistake. Maybe if Sophia had actually murdered someone, that would rate as a moderate error in judgment. "Patricia," I said, keeping my voice calm and even. "Sophia made her choices. I made mine. That's all there is to it. She's your wife." Patricia practically shrieked. "You took vows. For better or worse. In sickness and in health. You don't just throw away a marriage because of one little indiscretion." Indiscretion. That was a new one. We'd gone from tiny mistake to little indiscretion in the span of 30 seconds. I imagined Patricia sitting in her living room, probably drinking wine, workshopping different phrases to minimize her daughter's behavior. What would be next? Minor oopsie? Slight hoopsie-daisy? Teensy relationship hiccup? The vows also mentioned something about forsaking all others. I pointed out. Sophia seems to have missed that part. She didn't do anything. Patricia insisted, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. They were just talking, just catching up. You're being paranoid and jealous and controlling. That's what this is. You're one of those controlling men who can't handle their wife having male friends. I actually laughed at that one, which probably wasn't the reaction she was expecting. Patricia, I have the video. I have the audio. I have Mason literally confessing that they're making new memories while Sophia blushed and giggled. This isn't jealousy. This is called having eyes and ears that function properly. There was a pause on the other end, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to find a new angle of attack. She's heartbroken, Patricia finally said, switching tactics from anger to emotional manipulation. She's my baby girl, and she's heartbroken. She made a mistake. Yes, fine, a mistake. But don't you think you're being a little harsh? Couldn't you at least talk to her? Work this out. Go to counseling. No, I said simply. No talking, no working it out, no counseling. We're done, Patricia. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, but your daughter made her bed. Now she gets to lie in it. Preferably not in my apartment. You're going to regret this. Patricia's voice turned sharp again. The concerned mother act dropped faster than a hot potato. When you're alone and miserable and realize you threw away the best thing that ever happened to you, don't come crying back to us. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Have a good evening, Patricia. I hung up before she could respond, blocked her number for good measure, and went back to my Thai food. The noodles were getting cold, which was a tragedy, but at least they weren't lying to me about making new memories with their ex-boyfriend. 10 minutes later, I'd just gotten to the spring rolls. My phone rang again. This time it was Richard, Sophia's dad. Richard was a different breed from Patricia. He was a retired banker, the type of guy who thought every problem could be solved with aggressive negotiation tactics and intimidation. He'd never particularly liked me, probably because I didn't work in finance and didn't own a boat, which were apparently his two main criteria for acceptable son-in-law material. You son of a bitch, Richard greeted me, his voice low and dangerous. No preamble, no build-up, just straight to the insults. I appreciated the efficiency, honestly. Good evening to you too, Richard. Don't you good evening me, he snarled. You humiliated my daughter. You threw her out like garbage. You destroyed some poor kid's career. What the hell is wrong with you? Some poor kid. Mason was 34 years old and a VP of marketing. But sure, let's call him a poor kid who definitely didn't bring this on himself by cheating on his fiancée with a married woman. Richard, I said, before you continue, I need you to check your email. What? I don't give a damn about. Check. Your email. I said it slowly, deliberately, like I was explaining something to a particularly stubborn toddler. I sent you something this morning. Watch it. Then call me back if you still want to have this conversation. There was silence on the other end, broken only by his heavy breathing like an angry bull getting ready to charge. Fine, he finally spat. I'll look at your email. But this conversation isn't over. Take your time, I said cheerfully. I'll be here. He hung up without another word, and I glanced at my phone's clock. I gave him 10 minutes, maybe 15. The video was less than 4 minutes long, but I figured he'd need time to process what he was seeing, maybe watch it twice to make sure his precious daughter was really doing what it clearly showed her doing. I was generous with my estimate. 8 minutes later, my phone rang again. Same number. I answered on the first ring. Silence. Complete and total silence on the other end, except for breathing. Richard, I said. More silence. Then, finally, in a voice completely different from the angry snarl he'd used before. This one quiet, almost defeated, he said, I didn't know. I know you didn't, I replied, and I actually felt a tiny bit of sympathy for him. Finding out your daughter isn't who you thought she was couldn't be easy, even if she was an adult who should know better. She told us you were being controlling, that you were jealous of her having friends, that you were making her miserable. He paused, and I heard what might have been a sigh or might have been him taking a drink of something strong. She didn't tell us about that. No, I agreed. She wouldn't have. Another long pause. I should apologize. You didn't do anything wrong, Richard. You were defending your daughter based on the information you had. That's what parents do. Still, he said, and he actually sounded sincere for once in the years I'd known him. I'm sorry for what you did and for what I said just now. Apology accepted, I said. Take care of yourself, Richard, and maybe have a conversation with your daughter about accountability. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, I think I will. He hung up, and I sat there staring at my phone, genuinely surprised. I'd expected more yelling, more threats, maybe even Richard showing up at my door to try to intimidate me in person. What I got instead was a father realizing his daughter had lied to him and actually acknowledging it. Character development in real time. Who knew? My phone buzzed with a text before I could set it down. Jenna again. Just FYI, the video is making the rounds in our friend group. Everyone knows now. Sarah, Michelle, even Brad saw it somehow. Nobody's on Sophia's side. Thought you should know. I stared at that message for a long moment. The video was spreading. People were seeing the truth. The carefully constructed narrative Sophia had been building. Poor Sophia, with her controlling husband, was crumbling faster than a sandcastle at high tide. Another text from Jenna. Also, Sophia's been calling everyone asking them to talk sense into you. Nobody's doing it. We all saw what she did. That was messed up. I texted back. Thanks for the heads up. And thanks for not buying her version of events. Her response was immediate. Girl code only applies when your girl isn't being shady. What she did was beyond shady. That was full-on eclipse-level darkness. You deserve better. I smiled at my phone. It's funny how the truth works. You spend so much time worried about he said, she said, about people believing lies, about getting painted as the villain. But when you have actual evidence, when the facts speak for themselves, the truth has a way of cutting through all the manipulation and gaslighting like a hot knife through butter. My phone stayed mercifully quiet for the rest of the evening. No more calls from Sophia's family, no more angry texts from Mason's burner phones, no more drama. Just me, my Thai food, and college football on TV. Around 11 p.m., as I was getting ready for bed, I walked through my apartment one more time. It looked different without Sophia's stuff everywhere. Emptier, sure, but also cleaner. Freer. Like someone had opened all the windows and let fresh air in after years of stuffiness. I thought about Patricia's words. When you're alone and miserable and realize you threw away the best thing that ever happened to you. But standing there in my apartment, looking at the space that was finally just mine again, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel miserable. I felt lighter than I had in months, maybe years. The best thing that ever happened to me wasn't Sophia. The best thing that ever happened to me was finding out who she really was before I wasted any more time on her. I raised my glass of water because I'd already had 2 beers and I'm a responsible adult, unlike some people, and toasted the empty apartment. To the truth, I said out loud. And to all the people who can't handle it. That night, after all the phone calls stopped and the drama finally died down, my apartment felt different. Bigger somehow. Lighter. Like someone had been sitting on my chest for months and finally decided to get up and leave. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the good stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion. And if successfully exposing your cheating wife wasn't special, I don't know what was, and walked over to the window. The city stretched out below me, all lights and life, and people living their own complicated stories. Somewhere out there, Mason was probably updating his LinkedIn profile to seeking new opportunities, which is corporate speak for unemployed and unemployable. Somewhere else, Sophia was probably crying to her friends about how cruel and heartless I'd been, conveniently leaving out the part where she'd orchestrated this entire disaster herself. And Clara Sterling? She was probably deleting every photo of Mason from her phone and thanking whatever deity she believed in that she'd found out what kind of man he was before she actually married him. I took a sip of whiskey and let it burn its way down my throat. Good whiskey shouldn't be smooth. It should remind you that you're alive, that you made it through something difficult, that you survived. People talk about loyalty tests like there's some kind of romantic gesture, some way to prove how secure and evolved your relationship is. But here's the thing nobody tells you. If you feel the need to test your partner's loyalty, the relationship is already over. You've already lost trust, already started looking for exits, already begun the process of blowing everything up. You're just gathering evidence to justify it. Sophia thought she was testing my jealousy. She thought she was proving something about emotional maturity in modern relationships and how secure people should be able to handle their partners hanging out with exes. What she was really testing was her own decency, and she failed harder than a Wi-Fi connection during a storm. I looked at my reflection in the window, whiskey glass in hand, and I barely recognized the guy staring back at me. Not because I'd changed physically, but because I felt different, stronger, more sure of myself. Like I'd been playing a character in someone else's story and finally realized I could write my own ending. My phone buzzed one last time, a text from Marcus. "You alive, brother?" I smiled and typed back, "More alive than I've been in years." Now when people ask me about my ex-wife, and they will, because people love drama almost as much as they love pretending they don't, I just smile and give them the simplified version. She once tested my patience, I say, but I aced it. Extra credit and everything. I raised my glass to the window, to the city, to whatever came next. To all the loyalty tests I didn't ask for, I whispered, and then I drank to new beginnings.